The investor update blamed me for the $30 million revenue shortfall. My quarterly reports showed I'd flagged the resource cuts that made the targets mathematically impossible to achieve. The CEO's presentation to investors was dated November 15th. It cited sales leadership failures and execution gaps as the primary drivers of underperformance. My Q2 resource request was dated June 12th. It projected that the 40% headcount reduction in July would result in a $28 to $32 million revenue gap by year end. The CFO had responded on June 18th. Targets remain unchanged. Execute with current resources. I documented the conversation in my quarterly business review. I presented the updated forecast to executive leadership in August. I'd shown the math. Fewer sales reps, longer sales cycles, reduced pipeline coverage. The CEO had told me to find efficiencies. I'd delivered 92% of the original target, with 60% of the resources. That represented a 53% productivity increase per sales representative. The investor deck showed none of that context. It showed a $30 million miss and attributed it to my leadership. My name is Taylor. I was the Vice President of Sales for a remote software company based in Charlotte. I managed a distributed team of enterprise sales representatives. I built forecasts. I tracked pipeline. I reported revenue performance to executive leadership. I'd been doing this work for 3 years. We'd exceeded our targets every quarter until the July restructuring. Then they cut my team by 40% and kept the revenue targets the same. I opened my documentation folder and started organising the timeline. I had every quarterly business review I'd submitted since January. Each one included revenue forecasts, resource requirements, and risk assessments. The Q2 review from June showed my original projection: $82 million in annual revenue with a team of 25 enterprise sales reps. The July restructuring memo reduced my team to 15 reps. The revenue target remained $82 million. I'd recalculated the forecast immediately. 15 reps, average deal size $400,000, average sales cycle 4.5 months, historical close rate 22%. The math showed maximum achievable revenue of $54 million with the reduced team. I'd presented the revised forecast to the CFO and CEO in my Q3 planning meeting on July 28th. The CFO's response was documented in my meeting notes. We need to maintain investor confidence. The $82 million target stays. I'd asked how to bridge the $28 million gap with 40% fewer resources. The CEO's response: "That's why we pay you. Figure it out." I'd documented that exchange verbatim. I'd also documented my follow-up request for additional resources, approval to hire contract recruiters, budget for accelerated onboarding, and authorization to shift focus to smaller deals with faster cycles. All denied. The August quarterly business review included my updated forecast: $50 to $54 million in achievable revenue with current resources and current conditions. The CFO had rejected the forecast. Revised to show path to $82 million. I'd revised it. The revised version showed what would be required: either 10 additional sales reps hired immediately, or a 150% increase in close rates, or a 60% reduction in sales cycle length. None of those scenarios were realistic. The CFO had filed my revised forecast without comment. I'd continued managing my team. We'd closed deals. We'd maintained our historical performance metrics, but we'd closed them with 60% of the original headcount. By October, we were tracking to $52 million, exactly within my projected range, a 35% shortfall against the $82 million target, a 53% productivity increase per rep. The investor update in November blamed me for execution failures. I'd saved every quarterly review, every resource request, every forecast revision, every email exchange with finance and executive leadership. I organised them chronologically and dated. The investor call happened on November 16th. I wasn't invited to participate. I listened to the recording the CEO distributed to leadership afterward. Our VP of Sales failed to execute against targets despite having adequate resources, the CEO said. We're evaluating leadership changes and tracking exposed the context. I noted 3 every later, I received a calendar invitation from the CEO and the board chair, meeting chair for the following Monday. No ARIDA provided. I accepted the invitation and prepared a summary document. Original targets, resource reductions, revised forecasts, actual performance, all cross-referenced with dates and supporting emails. The Monday meeting included the CEO, the board chair, and the head of DMAR. I joined via video conference from my home office. The Boctober chair opened the conversation. We're reviewing Q3 and Q4 performance across all departments, she said. The revenue shortfall has raised concerns with our investors. We need to understand what happened in sales. I waited. Can you walk us through your perspective on the year's performance? I shared my screen and opened the summary document. In Q1, we were on track to exceed our $82 million target with a team of 25 reps, I said. In July, the team was reduced to 15 reps through the restructuring. The target remained $82 million. I showed the June 12th resource request and the June 18th response denying additional headcount. I projected that the reduction would result in achievable revenue of $50 to $54 million. I presented that forecast in July and August. Both times I was told to revise to show a path to the original target. I showed the quarterly business reviews and the CFO's responses. Actual performance through October is $52 million. That's within 4% of my projected range and represents a 53% increase in productivity per sales representative. The board chair reviewed the documents in silence. You forecasted the shortfall in June? She asked. Yes, the math was straightforward. Fewer reps, same deal size and cycle time, similar close rates. The revenue gap was inevitable. And you communicated this to executive leadership? In writing, multiple times. June, July, and August quarterly reviews. Each one documented the resource constraints and revised projections. The CEO spoke for the first time. Taylor's forecasts were overly conservative. We expected the team to find efficiencies and increase productivity. They did increase productivity, I said, by 53%. That's why we're at $52 million instead of the $36 million we would have hit at historical productivity levels. The board chair made notes. The investor presentation cited execution failures in sales leadership, she said. Based on these documents, it appears the performance gap was created by resource decisions, not execution failures. The CEO started to respond. The board chair continued. I'm going to request a full review of this situation. Taylor, please provide all supporting documentation to the board secretary. We'll need to understand the complete timeline. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. I compiled every document into a single folder and sent it to the board secretary that afternoon. 73 files. Every forecast, every resource request, every email exchange, every quarterly business review. I didn't hear anything for 2 weeks. During that time, I continued managing my team. We closed Q4 deals, we tracked pipeline for the following year, I submitted my Q1 forecast based on current resources. On December 3rd, the board chair sent an email to me, the CEO, and the CFO. Subject line: Board Review, Revenue Performance. The email stated that the board had completed its review of Q3 and Q4 revenue performance. They'd found that my forecasts had been accurate and that the performance gap resulted from resource constraints, not execution failures. The email also stated that the board expected revised investor communications to correct the characterization of the shortfall. The CEO responded within an hour. He agreed to provide clarified communications to investors. I saved the email chain and went back to work. The revised investor update was distributed on December 10th. It attributed the revenue shortfall to organizational restructuring impacts and resource optimization efforts during H2. No mention of sales leadership failures. No mention of execution gaps. I filed the revised update with my documentation. The CFO resigned on January 15th. The announcement cited pursuit of other opportunities. I was asked to present the Q1 forecast to the board directly. No executive intermediary, just me and the board reviewing the numbers. I presented my forecast. $18 million in Q1 revenue with current resources. The board asked what would be required to achieve $22 million. 5 additional enterprise reps, ramped by end of February, I said. Or approval to shift 30% of pipeline focus to commercial deals with shorter cycles. What's your recommendation? Hire the reps. Enterprise deals have better margin and retention. Commercial deals would hit Q1 numbers, but create challenges in Q2 and Q3. The board approved the headcount increase that day. I hired 5 reps in February. We hit $21.5 million in Q1, within 2% of target. The new CFO joined in March. Her first question in our initial one-on-one was about my forecasting methodology. I walked her through my approach: historical close rates, pipeline coverage models, resource capacity analysis. Your Q4 forecast was accurate within 4%, she said. That's better than most sales organizations achieve. The math works when you use realistic assumptions. The previous CFO's notes show he rejected your forecasts multiple times. He wanted forecasts that supported the investor narrative. I provided forecasts that reflected achievable outcomes with available resources. She nodded slowly. Going forward, I need your honest projections, not optimistic targets, not conservative hedges, your best assessment of what we can actually deliver. That's what I've been providing. Good. Keep doing that. I continued providing realistic forecasts. The board reviewed them quarterly. Sometimes they approved additional resources to close gaps. Sometimes they adjusted targets to align with capacity. But they didn't reject forecasts because the numbers didn't match their preferred narrative. 6 months after the board review, I was promoted to Senior Vice President of Revenue. The role included oversight of sales, customer success, and revenue operations. My first project was implementing a standardized forecasting methodology across all revenue functions. Every projection tied to capacity models. every variance analyzed against resource constraints versus execution factors. The board approved the methodology unanimously. A year after the $30 million shortfall, we exceeded our annual target by 8%. The investor update credited improved operational rigor and realistic resource planning. I'd built a forecasting system that separated achievable targets from wishful thinking. 18 months after my board presentation, I was recruited for a chief revenue officer position at a larger company. The opportunity came with significant equity and board-level visibility. I accepted the role. My departure was announced 3 weeks before my start date. The board chair's email thanked me for bringing analytical rigor and honest forecasting to our revenue planning. The CEO who'd blamed me for execution failures had left 6 months earlier. The new company had similar challenges: aggressive targets, limited resources, pressure to show investor-friendly projections. I implemented the same approach: realistic forecasts, capacity-based planning, clear documentation of resource constraints. The board learned to trust my numbers because they were consistently accurate. 3 years after the original investor update that had blamed me for the shortfall, I was CFO of a mid-sized software company. I oversaw all financial planning and analysis. I'd built my career on one principle: document what's realistic, not what's convenient. 5 years after leaving my original company, I still had copies of every quarterly business review from that period. The June forecast showing the inevitable gap. The July restructuring memo. The CFO's rejection of my revised projections. Not as vindication, as a reminder that numbers don't lie when you document the assumptions behind them. The CEO had told investors I'd failed to execute. My quarterly reviews had shown I'd flagged the resource gap 3 months before it materialized and delivered 53% higher productivity with the reduced team. The board had reviewed the documentation and reached their own conclusion. Everything after that had been just correction of the record. The forecasts I'd built 5 years ago were still the foundation of how I approached revenue planning. Start with the math, document the assumptions, and let the numbers tell the truth, regardless of whether it matched the story people wanted to hear.